Hi, I'm Sean, and if you've seen the title for this video, then you probably know what it's about already. So I won't spend too much time rambling on here. I just wanted to say a couple of things before actually getting on to the interview. And that is that this is actually my first journalistic type of interview that I've ever done, and I'm just incredibly new at this, so I apologize in advance for any audio issues, any video issues like micro stuttering or glitches or anything. This is my first time doing this, so. Also, I want to thank Ryan for sitting down and talking with me. That was very, very exciting and very fun for me to do. And I want to thank Chrissy74 from the Project C.A.R.S community for creating the liveries that I'm using in this video. And also Slightly Mad Studios and the Project C.A.R.S community in general for allowing something like this community-designed cars into the game. It's really pretty incredible. So after this short interlude by the RWD P30 itself, I'll get straight to the interview. Thanks for watching. Okay, so I am here with Ryan, who is one of the community members of Project C.A.R.S, but he also has the important distinction of actually designing two of the cars in the game. So Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, well, as Sean mentioned, my name is Ryan. I'm from Canada, live in downtown Toronto currently. I am a professional industrial designer and have been for a few years, despite the fact that I'm a tender young age of 27 years old. Racing has been something that's been a part of my life for pretty much as long as I can remember. Actually, my very first memory is being at Mosport and seeing one of the Nissan GTP cars back in the day, thinking that it was pretty much the coolest thing on the face of the earth. That's really when I fell in love with racing.
That would be back in the Camel GT days, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I think somewhere I still have an old program from that weekend.
Oh, wow. That's got to be a cool thing to have.
Yeah, it's tucked away somewhere in one of the boxes that's kicking around the storage unit.
So you've been an industrial designer. How long have you been doing that?
When I was in the 12th grade, I had a co-op placement with my high school, and I was at a small firm that's about a half hour outside of the city. At the time, it was just including myself, it was only 4 of us, but that was really when I got started, so I would have been about 17 at the time. And after about a week and a half of doing co-op as a student there, my boss came to me and said he wanted me to work there, so I started doing a few hours of co-op for my school, and then after that it was paid work. So it's been going on nearly 10 years now that I've been actually working as a paid designer.
Now, is that automotive related, or do you do other kinds of industrial design?
Mostly it's product stuff. The company I used to work for was a lot of sort of smaller personal things like hair dryers and curling irons and some massage equipment and stuff like that. Nothing that's, too groundbreaking or anything, but it was a great place to learn and really see what the industry was all about. And then after I graduated, I got invited to come in for an interview at a place that, among other things, does a lot of action sports equipment and small electronics as well. So since I graduated college, most of the work I've been doing has been on snowboarding equipment and stuff of that nature.
Oh, yeah. So when did you decide that you wanted to design race cars?
I don't remember how old I was, unfortunately, but I do recall one day I was homesick from school, and my mom was watching Oprah, and on the show, she had a a woman on. I believe she was a car designer for GM. And until that point, it never even occurred to me that that was a job or even a thing to do. And as soon as I heard that, I just thought, that's what I want to do.
And you got your opportunity to do that when Project C.A.R.S and Slightly Mad Studios held the contest for the prototype design.
Mm-hmm. That was something I definitely jumped at the chance to do, and I'm glad I was able to find enough free time to actually produce something.
Now, what did that process involve? Because obviously the people watching this probably don't have access to the forums, so don't know exactly what all went on with the whole thing.
Well, like anything else, when I start a project, I take a look at what exactly the end result needs to be. And in this case, the goal was to design a prototype that was both attractive, but also totally looked at home on the grid in real life. What I was going throughout the entire process, every decision I made was really based on, would you actually be able to see this? And I wanted somebody who may not be a massive sports car racing fan to see the car and just believe that it was a real car, not necessarily even know that it was a fictional car. So that was really the driving decision behind everything that I did.
I see. Now, I have driven both of the cars in the game, the RWDP-30 and the RWDP-20, which is an LMP1 and LMP2 class car. And I've noticed that the design is really angular and sort of aggressive looking, and not, like, I can't really place any of your inspirations of the car. It looks almost completely unique. So did you have any current generation prototype design influences or not?
I think the overall essence and sort of the major forms of the vehicle, if you look at the silhouette of it, it does have a bit of this sort of sinuous, smooth flowing shape to it. And then when you get down into individual details, it becomes more linear and hard edged. And that was the choice I made to differentiate it from the stuff that's on the grid right now. But at the same time, keeping that overall essence with the smoother forms was important for it to come across as being a real vehicle.
Mm-hmm. And you modeled the actual car for the competition. Like, you went through the whole design process from the ground up. I remember reading the thread and seeing the whole thing come together. And I was just wondering, what kind of software did you use? Did you use like SolidWorks or 3ds or something like that?
I used SolidWorks. It's what I use at work, and it's something that I'm very comfortable using, even if it's not necessarily the best program for this particular application. It's the one that I know, and so that's what I chose to use.
Mm-hmm. And when you were designing the car, did you pay any particular attention to the aerodynamics at all?
Nothing concrete or rooted in real numbers or anything, but I definitely wanted to at least give the impression that what was there would be aerodynamically sound. When it comes to certain elements, I took certain inspiration from a few vehicles. For instance, you look at it from the front of the P1 car, the bodywork between the nose and the fenders is quite high up. That was something that was borrowed from the Audi R15, I believe it was.
So that would be the R15 Plus, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep, I can definitely see that with the sort of way that it comes down in the front with that very aggressive sort of manta ray kind of look to it.
Exactly, yeah. And that's something that I felt. I always liked the R15. There's elements of it that a lot of people look at, and it's so purposeful. That's not beautiful in the conventional sense, but it has this really raw purposefulness to it that makes it elegant in its own way. Mm-hmm. And that front design, that kind of manta ray look that you mentioned, is something that's really, really a part of that vehicle and was really iconic.
Mm-hmm. Now, these cars for the competition, they were loosely designed around the 2013 LMP rules, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And so they have kind of wider fenders, and the greenhouse is kind of large in proportion compared to like something like the 919 and the new R18.
Mm-hmm.
And one question, and you kind of got to it already, but I kind of, when you were designing the car and you wanted it to look like something you could see on the track, with the final result, could you actually see this car maybe participating in something like the 2013 24 Hours of Le Mans?
That was the goal, and I feel that with the end result and judging by the comments that I've seen both on the forum and otherwise, I feel that I have hit that objective. I'm definitely very happy with that result.
Mm-hmm. And once you won the competition, or rather, I don't know if you placed first or second. There was the other car, the Merrick car. But once you actually won the competition and were actually selected to have your car in the game, how much control did Slightly Mad Studios give you with that whole process? Did you work with them at all?
A little bit. Initially, it began with me just converting the 3D file that I had built and sending that along, and it was essentially used as a kind of 3D blueprint. And then as the artists working on the game maps that were going through it, they made small alterations here and there as were necessary, a couple of small stylistic details that we decided could be changed. And most of that process is actually on the forums, right? The members who were there, they can sort of go through it all and see how it all came together and why certain decisions were made, certain little things may have been tweaked from the original design. But on the whole, the end result is actually remarkably close to what the design was, which is almost unheard of in the design field, to be totally honest. So it's really cool to see how much of the input was actually realized in the final version.
And when it comes down to the actual mechanicals and internals of the car, like the sort of the suspension and the engine and stuff, did you have any control over that, or was that just sort of Slightly Mad saying, well, we're going to do this with it?
That was something I didn't really give too much of my own input on, because those specific details are something that I'm not as familiar or knowledgeable about. And a lot of the guys working on the cars, it's kind of things they've been looking at for years, and they really know how these things should be a little bit more than I do. As far as the actual drivetrain, I knew pretty much from the beginning that I wanted it to be a flat engine, just because it's something that's a little bit more unusual, and I felt that that would give a little bit more personality to the vehicle. But as far as the suspension layout and that kind of stuff goes, I kind of just kept out of that discussion and let them work it out.
So is this a petrol car or a diesel car?
It is petrol. Early on, I entertained the idea of diesel, but ultimately, we have the R18 in the game, and well, the gasoline stuff always sounds a little bit better, and it's just a little bit more allure to it for sure.
Especially those flat Porsche-style engines with their very distinctive kind of engine note.
Exactly. And I mean, one of the huge advantages with the digital realm is we don't really have to worry about the environment all that much, so any savings in that regard are null.
I do have to say, Slightly Mad did a really, really, really good job with the engine modeling on the car. I mean, it just sounds absolutely fantastic when you're driving it.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
So I have a question for you, and I'm kind of wondering, because I've never designed anything in my life, and I've never had anything, like this happen to me in my life. But I'm wondering how it must feel for you, because we have physics testers on the Project C.A.R.S team who are professional drivers like Ben Collins and Nicholas Hamilton, among others. And I'm wondering, how does it feel knowing that a professional race car driver has driven your car and tested your car in the game so far?
It's a totally surreal feeling, and it's being a huge racing fan, doing stuff in the racing world is something that I've always really, really wanted to do, and something like this come to fruition is a pretty awesome experience.
Mm-hmm. And also, as you stated, you're Canadian and I'm Canadian. So is there any sort of like national pride you feel having this car in the game?
Absolutely.
I thought that would be your answer.
No need to elaborate on that.
Mm-mm. And it is kind of it's really neat for me personally because Canada does have like the driver aspect covered. I mean, we've had Jill, we've had Jacques, we have Tagliani and James Hinchcliffe and all these great drivers, but you don't really hear anything about our designers. Like you don't hear about any sort of Canadian Adrian Newey's or anybody out there at all.
Mm-hmm. It's I think one of the things is that racing, unfortunately, has never really been a huge part of the culture in this country. You know, despite we have had some significant influence on the world stage, but not to the extent that, you know, France or America or England or a lot of other countries have, which is kind of unfortunate. So it is pretty cool to see something like this come up and you know, be able to put that Canadian stamp on it and say, you know, we are here.
Mm. And hypothetically speaking, if some manufacturing company came to you, let's say tomorrow, and said, you know, that car that you designed for that video game, we kind of want to do that, and we kind of want to put it on the track for something like the Tudor United Sports Car Championship, or send it to Le Mans or something. How would you feel about that?
That's something that would be very difficult to put into words, I think. I mean, like I said, that kind of thing really is sort of my dream. And if that were to happen, I'd probably be speechless initially, and then obviously I'd be absolutely gung-ho on it, and I'd be thrilled, and I'd love to be involved in that process and just sort of see how everything works, how it all comes together.
Mm-hmm. I kind of wonder how they would source out a flat engine for the car.
Yeah.
It would seem like they would probably want to turn it into a turbo diesel or something like that, but it would kind of lose a little bit of its character to me if they did that.
Yeah, and then I think that is one of the benefits of digital, is we can ignore some of those realities.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen a lot of people saying that a flat engine, you know, in the real world may not necessarily be the way to go in a prototype, just mostly due to the way the floor is designed. You'd have to raise the engine up a little bit to get everything to fit in there, and it would kind of negate the height of the weight in the vehicle. So the whole point of the flat engine is to get the weight down low, and if you have to raise the whole thing up, then you're kind of eliminating that advantage. But
Mm-hmm.
no, we can kind of ignore that when we're on the computer.
For sure. And the thing I think is, because the last time a prototype ran with a flat engine was probably a Porsche, probably even the GT1 car, if I recall correctly. I don't think that the LMP1 actually had a flat engine at all.
Yeah, I think actually the 911 GT1 I always thought was, I assumed was a V formation.
I'm not sure that. I know that the open type that they ran before the GT1 car, I know that was a flat, because it was all those cars all the way up until the Porsche GT1 car was actually based on the 962 Group C car.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not entirely sure if it ran a V configuration or not. I guess it might have.
Well, it's the magic of technology here. I'm just doing a quick little search, and it looks like it was indeed a flat 6.
Ah.
So you are correct.
+1 for the sports car fan.
Yeah. But the other thing, too, is the P30 is a flat 8, and I think the last race car that had one of those was Porsche 908, I think.
Oh, gosh, that would be a long, long, long time ago. And I know that because with the miracles of technology, the other car in the game, the Merrick car, is actually going to use something more akin to the Skyactiv turbo diesel that the LMP2 style car is using in the Tudor United Sports Car Championship.
I think one of the really neat things with this whole project too is that, because we are creating fictional cars, we're allowing, with developers, they're really allowed to bring in these other influences and things. So instead of just sort of being limited to what we can license, we have the freedom to throw in a flat eight and a small diesel and those kind of things that we may not have got previously.
Mm-hmm. And something, because if you look back through the lines of prototypes in the past, there have been so many interesting combinations. I mean, the Judd engines, the Porsche engines, obviously, the absolutely immaculate Audi engines.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't seem to realize that throughout history there have been a lot of engine combinations in these cars. I mean, they weren't always, turbo diesels, and they weren't always, exactly that layout and that specific kind. They used to do a lot of development in these cars, and now it seems like Slightly Mad wants to capture some of that sort of diversity in the sport and bring it to sort of an end user and say, look, we could have this today if somebody just sat down and said, we want to put something different in our race cars.
Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the most interesting aspects of this entire experience too. It's just being able to bring some of those things that a lot of us remember from our earlier years, we read in history books, and just a lot of details that the world at large has kind of forgotten.
And that has a sort of golden question to it, because a lot of people are probably going to see the P30 in the game and think this petrol car couldn't possibly compete against an Audi or a 919 or anything like that. And the whole Project Cars project seems focused around making the absolute realistic possible racing game for an end user and bringing the best physics and the most accurate data. So I'm wondering, could you see this car actually competing against something like an R18, or would it be more in the sort of bracket of the Rebellion Toyota maybe?
Probably closer to Rebellion Toyota, just by virtue of Audi has a lot of money.
Yes, they do. That is true. But at least it might compete against something like the 919 with its kind of spotty reliability issues.
Yeah.
Now the other car, the RWD P20. Now I know that car is just more or less based on the P30 itself. It's not an actual complete ground up build. And Slightly Mad made a lot of changes to that, and I've followed the build up of the car on the forums, and obviously nobody watching it presumably would have access to that. But how much control did you have over the changes for the LMP2 style car?
There was actually a lot more change than I initially thought would be done, purely because of the time scale. When I was designing the car in the first place, though, I always had these sort of alternate features in mind, and I actually did a few sketches over top of the final P1 design for a proposed second version, whether it be sort of a previous year or privateer version of the P1, or have it be the P2 car. And so when the decision was made that there was time to make a P2, those sketches were brought in, and basically everything that I had already in mind, that I had planned in from the very beginning of the P1 car, was executed on the P2, and I was very happy to see that. And then there was a few other details and things that I hadn't thought of that have been brought up on the forum that were really interesting to see come up. Like Felix suggested lowering the bodywork so it's more similar to some of the P2 Lolas, which was a great change, and it really totally changed the look of the car for the better as far as being a P2 car. So it's cool to see how the same basic design had these few modifications done to it, it really transformed the feel of it. I mean, they look like they are related, but if you see them side by side, you can definitely tell that the P2 car looks a little more svelte. It's a little lighter, more streamlined looking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of that was that I had planned some of this from the beginning, and part of that was just, the whole community aspect of the sim with people giving their input on the things. And there's a lot of great ideas that were brought up, and the end result is pretty spectacular.
I remember reading the thread and seeing a lot of talk about things like the sort of shark gills on the side pods getting closed off, and the lights especially.
The one of the initial concepts that I had for the P1 car with those gills and the little side valence panel was that these were, if it were a real car, they would be quick to sort of unbolt, and you could replace it with something else if you wanted to blank off some of the vents, or if you needed sort of an on-the-fly aerodynamic change on the car. And I think that actually, funny enough, was an advantage when it came time to do the P2 car, because even though I designed it thinking of if it was a real-world car, this would be a neat detail, it actually came into use digitally with the alterations to design for the next version of the car.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I can see that the car that's in the game, the actual model that they put in the game, looks sort of like a hybrid between a higher downforce car and a lower downforce sort of Le Mans or Spa specification car.
Mm.
And it would be easy for me to see some of your changes, like if they blanked out the gills on the side and gave it a more streamlined look or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That was just all part of the considerations that I sort of set out for myself from the beginning. It's one of the details that I wanted to add to the car to give it that sense of real world, even if it wasn't going to be utilized in the game. It's a little hint visually that there is something else there.
Now, you really went into this whole project with pretty much everything you got, it sounds like. And I'm wondering, during the competition and the voting process, did you have any idea that this car would actually make it into the game?
Right in the beginning, when the polls went up, I saw that it started out very, very strong, and immediately, I was very elated to see that. I mean, there were several very strong entries in the competition, and throughout the whole thing, there was always that little element of nervousness, and is this actually going to make it after spending all this time? And so it was a little nerve-wracking, but very, very exciting all at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. The other entries, I mean, there was a member that you already mentioned. Felix had a really, really, really nice looking car,
Mm-hmm.
and there was actually a Photoshop of a front engine car that another member did, and that looked like a really strong contender with sort of like a fan favorite kind of thing going on.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, there was a lot of very, very strong competition in there, and it was anyone's game right from the get go, and there was a lot of stuff in there with that too that was completely unexpected, like that the front engine car just sort of came out of left field, sort of towards the end of the competition. Somebody decided, hey, let's do this,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really cool to see things like that come into play.
And it kind of makes me wonder, I mean, if they could have allowed more cars into the game, because your car got in and the Merrick prototype got in, obviously. But which one of the other entries maybe would you like to see? Would you like to see the open top sort of thing like Felix had, or the really kind of strange looking front engine prototype? Which car, besides the two that made it in the game, would you like to see there?
Oh, I don't know if I could pick one. Lux had a very, very nice entry. Panzer had a beautiful entry as well. The front engine one, I mean, I loved the old Panoz front engine cars. They were awesome.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to pick one, I think I would go with Felix's car, just because it, aside from being gorgeous, it was open cockpit, so it was different from the other two that have made it through into the game. And the front engine car, it's something that's so it stands out so much, just like the original Panoz did, that I feel like in the context of being a fictional car, a lot of people would pick up on that a little bit quicker than with the other cars that are a little bit more reserved in approach. And for me, having these cars look like they could be real was probably the most important aspect. And as cool as the front engine one is, and even though it has been done in the past, I think it would stand out a little bit more as being fictional than what some of the other designs were.
Absolutely, and I think the last front-engined prototype, I think that might have been probably the Cadillac. I think the Cadillac beats the Panoz by maybe a year. So that's been a while. I mean, that was at least 7 or 8 years ago, so people would see that and think, no, that can't be a modern prototype at all. So I could totally see that.
Yeah, and even, you know, back then looking at the car, I just thought, you know, that's insane. Why are they even doing that? I mean, even in real life, it was almost a surreal thing.
I remember seeing the Panoz and being like, what is this thing on the racetrack? This couldn't be here at all. But then I kind of warmed up to the Cadillac, but the Cadillac was an awful car. It was just a terrible car.
Yeah, I was very sad when they killed the program after the 2002 season, because they had finally started to do well with that one, and then they just sort of axed it all and kind of all for naught.
I've always found that kind of strange because it was starting to come into its own, and they were just like, nope, no more of this.
Yeah. Final decisions just don't make any sense. All kinds of weird things all through motorsports.
Absolutely.
Still blows my mind that, you know, Toyota, the biggest manufacturer on the planet, can't afford a Formula One team, but an energy drink manufacturer can afford two.
Well, I think that with regards to Red Bull, they are sort of like the Renault factory team. I mean, it's kind of obvious if you look at it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think that Red Bull would actually have all that money to themselves. That would be kind of really odd for somebody who makes, you know, energy drinks and soft drinks to have all this money to run Formula One teams, especially when they run so many other sporting teams throughout the world.
Yeah, Red Bull's definitely got their hand in anything that's fast and fun.
And it really works out for them, too. I mean, there's a whole bunch of Red Bull fans, and it brought in other energy drink manufacturers, because I know that I remember seeing Red Bull way, way back. And I think the first time I saw a Red Bull on a Formula One car was maybe the late 90s, and then after that we started seeing things like Rockstar, Monster Energy.
Yeah, I think they've all sort of adopted that Red Bull mantra, and they're trying to get in on that same sort of feel and the same crowd. But Red Bull's definitely got a really strong hold in there, and it's worked out famously for them.
So I only have 3 more questions for you. And the first question is, if your car was a real-world car on a real-world team driving at, say, the real-world Le Mans 24-hour race, and you could pick a team of 3 drivers for it, which drivers would you want to drive your car?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think my first driver would have to be Ron Fellows. Absolutely. I mean, he was my racing idol for sure. And actually, when I was working on my senior thesis in school, I was designing a race car as well, and he was my senior thesis, so I actually got to talk to him and discuss these things with him, and it was very cool. And he's a really, really great guy and an amazingly talented driver.
Mm-hmm.
But he's definitely on there.
And for those who don't know what we're talking about, Ron Fellows is actually a Canadian racing driver, and he has won at Le Mans before.
He was the Corvette #1 driver for many, many years until his partial retirement. He also now owns Mosport, which is the greatest racetrack on the planet.
It is that. It is that. That is true.
For other drivers, that's tough. There's so many. I've always really liked Alan McNish, and I mean he definitely proved himself behind the wheel of the prototype at Le Mans. I think anyone can really agree to that.
Oh yes.
And I'd love to see what Andy Lally could do in a prototype too. Actually.
Oh wow, Andy Lally. That is coming out of left field. Andy Lally is actually one of my favorite sports car drivers of all time. Like, I am a huge Andy Lally fan, so that's really nice to hear for me.
I think my favorite thing about Andy Lally is that he is such a character. I mean, in addition to being an amazingly talented driver, he's a presence in the paddock always.
Mm-hmm.
And
he is so involved outside of the sport too. I mean, this is a guy who has I think he's a black belt of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a world-class street luger.
Yeah.
Which is just absolutely outstanding. And he's also a vegan. He's a very outspoken vegan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely like to have a conversation with him for sure.
Now, the next question I want to ask you, it's kind of an oddball question, maybe. I'm not sure, but I want to ask you, what is your favorite prototype race car of all time?
I think I might have to be a little bit typical with this one, but the Porsche 917K has just always had a very special place for me. I think I'm going to have to go with that. And I know I'm not alone on that, but it's a very, very cool car, and I think that's probably going to have to be my favorite.
And the 917K, you like the one with the sort of flat back, or you like the one with the great big fins on it?
I could take it either way.
Either way, it is a beautiful race car. That is absolutely correct. I love that car so much. And finally, the final question that I want to ask you, and it's going to give a very, very obvious answer, because we already know what the answer is going to be, and you've pretty much already said what the answer is going to be. But if you could have one racetrack in Project Cars, which racetrack would it be?
Have to be Mosport, for sure.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. I can't believe that we do not have Mosport in the game yet. I mean, come on, what's going on?
Yeah, it maybe DLC. We'll get it in there.
We'll have to make a few calls to Mosport.
I think so.
Okay, Ryan, I think that will be good. Thank you for joining me for this interview.
All right, well, thanks for inviting me on this.
All right, thanks, buddy.
Take care.